The gun shop sat like a stubborn outpost on the edge of town, squeezed between a bait store with peeling signage and a warehouse stacked high with lumber. The windows were tinted, casting the interior in a subtle gloom that gave everything inside an air of authority, an illusion more than reality. Rifles stood in neat rows along the walls like trophies. In glass display cases, pistols gleamed under fluorescent lights, their polished surfaces reflecting the pride of their owners more than the skill of their makers. The air smelled faintly of oil, dust, and the distant hum of a country song filtering down from a ceiling speaker. Behind the counter, two clerks leaned lazily over their phones. One scrolled with his thumb, barely glancing up. The other laughed under his breath at something on his screen. The store didn't rely on constant foot traffic. It traded on its image, an image carefully curated for customers who liked the look of danger without having to taste it. At 10:43 a.m., the bell above the door gave a modest chime. The man who stepped in didn't command attention, at least not the kind most people noticed. His boots were worn to the point of smoothness, his jeans patched at the knee, and the leather jacket he wore looked older than half the people who worked in the store. He walked slowly, his limp noticeable but not pitiful. The cap on his head was faded, but the golden trident insignia of the Navy SEALs was still visible. His eyes, sharp and steady, scanned nothing in particular. He knew where he was going. He stopped at the counter, resting one weathered hand on the glass. The younger clerk finally looked up. "Need something, sir?" he asked, his tone polite enough, but hollow. The old man nodded once, wondering if he still carried the M1 Garand replica. The real stock model, not the cut-down display piece. The clerk blinked. "That's a collector's rifle. Not exactly something you want to fire." "I'm not looking to fire it," the man replied, his voice even. "Just want to hold it for a moment. Haven't touched one in decades." The second clerk, older but with the smirk of someone who thought he knew more than most, chimed in with a chuckle. "That rifle's heavier than it looks, Pops. Might be a bit much for your back." "I carried one across jungles," the old man said without a smile. "I can manage it across a showroom." The smirk turned into a laugh. "Okay, Rambo. Unless you're buying, you're just taking up space. We're not a museum." For a brief second, something shifted in the old man's eyes, like a flicker of memory. But he didn't argue. He simply nodded once. Understood. Then, without another word, he turned and walked to the door. Each step deliberate, unhurried. He left the same way he came, quietly, almost invisibly. The clerks went back to their phones, already forgetting him. Neither noticed the woman in the corner by the ammo rack. She watched the old man leave, her ball cap pulled low over her eyes. 2 minutes later, she stepped outside, pulled a phone from her pocket, and made a single call. She said only 3 words. He was here. At 11:43 a.m., the first black SUV rolled into the parking lot and stopped near the entrance. The engine stayed on. A minute later, another arrived, then a third. No one got out at first. No radios, no music, no wasted motion, just a quiet hum of idling engines and darkened glass. Inside, the clerks were still scrolling, still laughing, still completely unaware of the shift happening just outside their tinted windows. When the doors opened, they opened all at once. 12 men stepped out in a deliberate rhythm, some in civilian jackets, some in press dress uniforms, others in plain shirts that somehow carried more authority than any badge. They didn't march, but the precision in their movement was unmistakable. It was in the way their eyes scanned the street, not nervously, but out of habit, in the way their shoulders squared naturally, as if the world was always a place to be navigated with caution. They crossed the sidewalk without a word. The bell above the gun shop door chimed as they stepped inside, one after another, forming a semicircle in front of the counter. The younger clerk barely looked up. "Welcome in, gents. Looking for anything specific today?" he asked casually. Then he saw their faces, and he froze. The man at the center stepped forward. His hair was streaked with gray, his jaw square, his chest lined with ribbons, and on his breast, the golden seal trident gleamed. "1 hour ago," he said evenly, "one of us walked through that door." The words weren't loud, but they landed with the weight of steel. The older clerk shifted uneasily. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." A single look from the man silenced him. "He didn't come here to be honored," the SEAL continued. "Didn't ask for recognition. He just wanted to hold a rifle he hadn't touched since Vietnam. Your staff laughed, called him Grandpa, told him to leave. You didn't ask who he was. You didn't care." He reached into his pocket and placed something on the glass. It was a scorched flag patch, frayed around the edges. "He pulled this off my uniform while I was bleeding out in Helmand," the man said quietly. "Carried me for 22 hours with no backup, and a hole in his side the size of my fist. Never told anyone. Never asked for thanks." Another SEAL stepped forward and placed a photograph on the counter. 8 men in dusty fatigues, arms over each other's shoulders, sunburnt but smiling. In the center, younger but unmistakable, was the man they'd thrown out an hour earlier. The younger clerk swallowed. "I didn't know." "Exactly," the SEAL said. "You didn't ask. No threats, no demands, just truth." Then, as one, the 12 men turned and walked out. Outside, a small crowd had begun to gather. No one spoke. They just watched the SUVs drive away, one by one. Inside the store, silence settled like dust. The photograph stayed on the counter. By 1:45 p.m., the photo was already moving faster than rumor could ever travel. It began in a closed veterans group on Facebook. A man named Harrigan, Army retired, posted a shot of 12 Navy SEALs standing silent inside the gun shop. The caption read, "When you disrespect one, you get all of them." There was no context, no explanation, just the image. It was shared 74 times in the first hour, then hundreds. People who'd never set foot in that town wanted to know, who was the man they were standing for? At 2:12 p.m., the first answer appeared in the comments. James C. Beckett. Some locals knew the name only because they'd seen him around. Always polite, always quiet. He wore the same beat-up SEAL Team 3 cap every day. Never told stories. Never sat in the center of a room. The deeper the internet dug, the more the picture changed. One commenter wrote, "He was my uncle's CO in 91. Saved 3 men in Panama. Never once talked about it after." Another posted, "If that's Beckett, we're talking about a ghost. A real one. Guys like him don't end up in the news. You only hear about them in briefings." An old personnel file emerged from a dusty military archive, scanned and uploaded. It was bare bones and almost clinical. Master Chief Special Warfare Operator James Charles Beckett. Joined 1966. Retired 2004. Bronze Star. Silver Star. Purple Heart. Numerous unlisted commendations. Service: Vietnam, Mogadishu, Panama, Iraq. 35 confirmed extractions in hostile zones. No memoir, no interviews, no speeches. Just decades of missions no one would ever fully know about. By 3 p.m., a local news site published a piece titled Silent Visit. 12 Navy SEALs walk into gun store in support of local veteran. There were no sensationalized details, only the facts. A man came in, was turned away, and an hour later, his brothers showed up. Inside the store, the mood was still thick and heavy. The photo of the 8 dusty men stayed on the counter. Beckett in the center with that half-smile that looked both relaxed and unshakable. Customers began walking in, not to shop, but to ask, "Who's the man in the photo? Will he be back?" One older customer, a Marine from Desert Storm, stood at the counter for a long moment, studying the image. Then, without a word, he raised his hand in salute and walked out. By 4 p.m., a veteran-run magazine posted an editorial called "The Ones Who Stand When You're Gone." The final line hit like a quiet hammer. James Beckett didn't need to speak. His silence was carried by 12 voices that never had to raise theirs. Somewhere across town, Beckett was at his kitchen table, unaware of the digital storm that now carried his name. The gun shop's manager arrived just before dusk, pale-faced and holding his phone like it was evidence. He'd been sent the viral photo twice before he even reached the parking lot. Inside, he found the scorched flag patch still sitting on the glass case. Neither clerk had touched it. Without a word, he opened the display, removed the M1 Garand replica. the same one Beckett had asked for, and placed it next to a photograph. Then he took a scrap of paper, wrote in block letters, and slid into a frame beside the rifle. He carried it once. Will carry the memory now. Outside, someone left a single white flower by the door. Later, a challenge coin appeared next to it. By nightfall, a folded piece of paper with one word written in ink rested there too. Respect. No one organized a memorial. No one gave a speech. People simply arrived, veterans, families, strangers, and stood outside for a while before leaving. The mood wasn't outrage. It was something quieter. A kind of reverent hush, as if raising your voice here would be wrong. Meanwhile, Beckett's life went on unchanged, at least on the surface. He still walked 2 miles every morning, still ordered black coffee, without sugar at the corner diner, still sat alone in the back booth where no one asked to join him. But there were differences. People now looked twice when they passed him on the street. Not staring, just noticing. A high school invited him to speak on Veterans Day. He didn't respond. But a week later, the principal received an envelope containing a single handwritten account of a rescue operation from 1970. No name, no signature, just coordinates and the names of 6 men saved. The letter was framed and placed in the hallway, without ceremony. Back at the gun shop, the display became more shrine than sales floor. Veterans began leaving their own unit patches beside Beckett's photo. One day, the SEALs came back, not to the store, but to Beckett's diner. They didn't take a table. They just walked in one by one until they stood silently beside his booth. Beckett looked up from his coffee. The youngest among them, born long after Beckett had earned his trident, spoke quietly. "Sir, if it's all right, we'd like to sit with you." Beckett nodded once. They filled the booth, and for the next hour, no one in the diner heard a single word from them. But the silence was unforgettable. Beckett never spoke about that day in the gun shop. Not to his neighbors, not to the waitress who poured his coffee, not even to men who had stood for him. For him, it was already over the moment he stepped out of that door. He had seen worse, survived worse, and long ago made peace with the fact that the world moved on quickly. But the world hadn't moved on. 2 weeks after the diner visit, the gun shop owner quietly mailed Beckett a small wooden box. Inside, resting on black felt, was the M1 Garand replica. No note, just a rifle. The old man didn't put it on display. He didn't hang it over a mantel. He placed it in his closet, next to an old duffel that hadn't been unzipped in years. In town, people began speaking differently about him, not in loud praise. Beckett wouldn't have wanted that, but in the low, respectful tones reserved for men whose stories can't be told in full. The shop itself changed. Customers came less for the gear and more for the memory. Veterans walked in, touched the glass case where Beckett's scorched patch rested, and walked out without buying a thing. The owner didn't mind. Some left small tokens, dog tags, challenge coins, unit pins. The counter became a living archive, each item carrying its own weight. A reporter once tried to reach Beckett for a national piece on unsung heroes. She left messages. She sent letters. She never heard back, because Beckett's code wasn't built for headlines. It wasn't built for applause. It was built in mud, in dark water, in the smell of cordite and diesel. It was built in the understanding that loyalty doesn't expire when the mission ends. The people who knew him best didn't need his story spelled out. They knew enough from the way 12 men had shown up without a word. That was the language of their brotherhood. No press conference. No speeches. Just presence. One cold morning in late autumn, Beckett walked past the shop on his way to the diner. Outside, a man in a wheelchair, Marine Corps cap, career ribbon pinned to the brim, sat facing the door. He didn't stop Beckett. He didn't speak. He just saluted. Beckett nodded in return and kept walking. Inside the diner, the same waitress poured his coffee. "Morning, Chief," she said. He gave the same small nod he always had. But this time, the young man bussing tables paused, straightened up, and watched him for a moment before going back to work. These were the kinds of changes Beckett noticed, not in headlines, but in eyes, in the way people made space for him in a doorway, in the way silence shifted when he entered a room. Months later, The shop owner replaced the paper sign beside the M1 Garand with a brass plaque. It read, "For the man we didn't recognize." And the brothers who made sure we never forget. No one in town called it the Beckett rifle, but everyone knew what it was. And if someone new asked, the answer was never a boast. It was always told in the same way, low, steady, and with a kind of weight you can't fake. Because in the end, the story wasn't about a rifle. It wasn't even about the moment 12 SEALs walked into a shop. It was about the truth that some men carry without ever needing to speak it. Beckett didn't need the world to know who he was, but his brothers did. And that was enough.